Welcome back to the Python Fundamentals tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about user input and how to interpret data that the user inserts into the program. So before we get started with that, we should learn about escape sequences. So let's start by declaring a variable called shopping list, right? And it's just going to be a string of what we want from shopping, right? Eggs, ham, cheese, broccoli, or something, right? So this is my shopping list, and I can print it out. Okay, and obviously it works. Okay, but let's say I wanted to have ham, cheese, and broccoli on the next line, right? Let's say I wanted to make an actual list that went like vertically instead of horizontally. How can I add spaces, like a whole enter, in between a string? Well, that's what escape sequences are for. So after eggs, I can do slash n, okay? And then I can do the same thing after ham and after cheese, okay? And what this is going to do is now they're all on the line after. You can see there's a little space before each of them because there's a space between the N and the start of the word, right? So if I got rid of that space, I would have a list like this, okay? And there are a lot more escape sequences, such as like this one. I can have running, and then I can do slash T for tab, right? Is great. And when I didn't print it out. And when I run this, I have tabs in between all of them, right? And there are many more escape sequences that you can look into. It's just that I'm going to be using slash n for this video, so I wanted to make sure everybody knew about that. So now we can get into taking on user input. So to do that, we just declare a variable, right? So say name, okay? And then we're going to do input, and then we put quotation marks, enter your name, okay? And what this is going to do is it's going to ask for input and it's going to print out enter your name. So the user knows what they're doing, right? So let's do print name, right? So F5, and now it says right here, enter your name. And now it's asking me to put in my name. So I'll just say guacamole. And it prints out exactly what I put in, right? Spelled wrong, obviously. Um, But we can also use an escape sequence here. So enter your name and then do slash n. And now this is a lot easier to read, right? Enter your name and then you put in and it'll print it out. Okay. So we can also ask for a number, right? So entered num is equal to input. Enter a random number. Then we do that escape sequence. And let's say we wanted to add the number by 5 and then output it, okay? So first it's gonna ask us our name, and it won't go past that until this is done, right? So I enter my name, and then it asks to enter a random number, 9. Now we got an error, right? Print entered num plus 5. Type error. Can only concatenate string, not integer to string. So we know that 5 is an integer, but it's saying that entered num is a string, and therefore it can't add a string and an integer. And that's because input is actually taken in as a string, right? So even if I put in 9, Python doesn't know that the 9 is an integer. It thinks that the 9 is a string with just the character 9. We can solve this problem with typecasting, right? So let me get rid of this line. And what typecasting is it allows us to change the data type of a variable. So I can do entered num is equal to int, right? Which is the type that I want to change the value to. And then put in entered num, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to take entered num, which is right now a string, and it's going to convert it to an integer, and it's going to store that value back into entered num, right? Now I can do print entered num plus 5, right? Put in my name, enter a random number, 5. and 5 plus 5 is 10, and it prints out 10 as a number. Okay. So we can also split input that the user gives us, right? It's gonna be like entered list. Oh, entered list. Okay. So me input, enter a list of numbers separated by commas. Okay. Then we put the escape sequence at the end. And now the user is going to put in something like this, like 5, 7, 45, something like that, right? And we want to split those into separate values, right? So we can use the dot split here, right? So dot split, and we can split by the comma. Now we print entered list. Now let's go. Random number. And now enter a list of numbers separated by commas. So 4, 3, and I can just put anything as long as it's a number. And it'll print out back a list of the numbers. But again, each entry is actually a string. It's not a number. So we can't add or subtract to any of them because they're not integers, right? So we can solve this with typecasting by iterating through the list, right? So we know that entered list is a list because once we do dot split on a string, it becomes a list of string entries, right? So now let's iterate through that. So for x in, and this time I don't want to go through the list like entered list because I want to change the values in the list, right? So remember that to do that, I need to look at the indices of the list. So I can do range length entered list. Now, what I'm doing is I'm iterating through 0 to the length of the entered list, which is basically me going through every single index of this list, right? And so, entered list. Now, the index is x, right? And set that equal to int entered list x, right? So this is very similar to what we did up here, right? It's just that now we have an indice to specify what value we're talking about, right? And then from here, we can print entered list, and these are all going to be numbers, okay? So to prove that, let's say I'll do enter. Let's say I'll just add 2 to all of them, okay? So let me run this. Now enter a numbered list, right? So 3. Now we can see we got an error. Entered list is not defined. So I got an error here because list should be capital here. Now I'll run it again. Okay, so 4, 5, 3, 4. Now we can see that it prints out numbers. You can tell that they're numbers because they don't have single quotations around them. And I added 2 to every value that I inputted. So these are now officially integer values, right? And just to practice what we've learned so far, we can take the sum of the values in the user inputted list, right? So nums is equal to input, enter numbers separated by, and I did commas before, but I can do anything now. Separated by, I don't know, a minus sign, right? Dot split. Then I put in the minus sign in those quotation marks. Now I can do for x in nums, or in the range of the length of nums, right? So remember, this is me going through all the indices of nums, right? So nums x is equal to integer nums x. Now, I want to take the sum, right? So I'm going to set a value called sum equal to 0 outside of the loop. Then do sum plus, and when I run that, my name, number. Okay, now with enter number separated by the minus sign. So 4, 6, put in whatever I want. And we can see that 33 is the sum of all of this if you check. But usually you want to avoid splitting by something like a minus sign because then the user can't input negative numbers, right? So I was just showing that you can split by anything. It doesn't have to be a comma. It's just that commas are very easy to read and they're the most common that you'll see. So that's going to be it for this video. We went through user input, splitting it, escape sequences, and summing the values in the user inputted list.